America tells you it's the land of freedom, the land of opportunity, the place where anyone can rise if they work hard enough. But look around, why does it feel so broken? Why are so many people working 2 jobs and still living paycheck to paycheck, while a handful of billionaires own more wealth than half the nation combined? Why do the rich get richer in every crisis, while the poor carry the weight of sacrifice? This is not by accident. Karl Marx warned us about this exact system built not to lift everyone up, but to divide, exploit and concentrate power in the hands of a few. What you feel today, debt, stress, endless struggle, is not personal failure. It is the design of capitalism. And unless we wake up to this truth, the cycle will keep repeating. The American dream is one of the most powerful myths ever created, a story told to convince people that success is simply a matter of effort, discipline, and hard work. From childhood, Americans are taught that if you study hard, work hard, and keep pushing forward, you can achieve anything you want. But when you look beneath the surface, this dream reveals itself as an illusion carefully designed to keep workers obedient while wealth flows upward. Marx would argue that this dream does not exist to empower people, but to pacify them. It tells workers that their struggles are temporary, that failure is their own fault, and that the system is fair even when it clearly isn't. By believing in the dream, workers continue to endure exploitation, hoping that someday it will all pay off, when in reality the system ensures that most never escape the cycle. The illusion of the American dream functions as a tool of control. It convinces people to accept long hours, low wages, and endless struggle because they think success is just around the corner. A worker may grind for decades, believing that promotion, wealth, or comfort will eventually arrive, but the truth is the system is built to keep them in place. Rising costs of housing, healthcare, and education make upward mobility harder every year, and wages have stagnated while profits soar. The gap between the rich and poor grows wider, yet the story of the dream keeps workers hoping instead of resisting. Marx would say that this is how ideology works. It hides the reality of exploitation by offering a fantasy of future reward. Instead of questioning why billionaires grow richer while ordinary people fall behind, many continue to believe they just need to work harder, waiting for their turn at success. This dream also serves the interests of the capitalist class because it individualizes failure. When people struggle, they are told it is because they did not study enough, save enough, or hustle enough. The system never admits that it is structured to benefit the few at the expense of the many. By placing blame on the individual, capitalism avoids responsibility for the inequalities it produces. Workers blame themselves instead of questioning the system. They work multiple jobs, sacrifice family time, and exhaust themselves, believing that effort alone determines outcome. But the truth is that ownership, inheritance, and privilege matter far more than effort. Those born into wealth are already ahead, and the dream is used to hide this reality by pretending everyone starts from the same place. Marx would also point out that the dream feeds competition between workers instead of solidarity. If everyone is chasing their own version of success, they are less likely to unite against the system that exploits them all. Workers compete with one another for jobs, promotions, and wages, believing that climbing the ladder will bring security, but they rarely realize the ladder itself is rigged. For every person who climbs higher, countless others are pushed down. The dream masks this cruelty by celebrating the exceptions. Stories of the few who escape poverty or achieve wealth are broadcast as proof that anyone can do it, even though the majority cannot. These exceptions are used as propaganda, keeping hope alive for millions who will never achieve the same outcome. In reality, the American dream keeps workers locked in a cycle of production and consumption. They work long hours to survive, spend their wages to sustain the very corporations that exploit them, and then return to work the next day to repeat the cycle. Debt is normalized, struggle is glorified, and rest is seen as laziness. All of this serves the system by ensuring workers remain productive while never gaining true freedom. Marx would argue that the dream is not about liberation but about control, a way of making exploitation tolerable by disguising it as opportunity. It tells workers to be patient, obedient, and hopeful, while the wealth they create is taken by those at the top. When people finally begin to question the dream, they see that it was never designed for everyone. It was designed to preserve the power of the few, to keep workers chasing an illusion while the real wealth flows upward. The American dream is not broken. It is functioning exactly as intended, as a story that hides inequality and keeps the majority striving for something they were never meant to reach. Capitalism has always carried within it the tendency to concentrate wealth and power into fewer and fewer hands, and Marx saw this as one of its most destructive truths. The system begins with the promise of competition, of open markets where anyone can rise, but the reality is that competition inevitably produces winners and losers. Those who own capital, factories, land, machines, and in the modern world, corporations and digital platforms have the ability to grow faster than those who only sell their labor. Over time, the winners accumulate more resources, buy out smaller competitors, and consolidate their dominance. The losers are forced to close, lay off workers, or sell themselves to the larger players. What begins as competition ends in monopoly or oligopoly, with entire industries controlled by a small elite. Marx argued that this was not an accident or corruption, but the natural trajectory of capitalism. The very logic of profit ensures that wealth does not spread evenly, but flows upward. Centralizing in the hands of those who already own the result of this concentration is that while a small minority grows unimaginably wealthy, the vast majority of people struggle simply to survive. Workers produce the wealth of society, but they see only a fraction of it in wages, while the rest is siphoned upward as profit. As costs of living rise, housing, healthcare, education, the share of income workers actually shrinks further. Meanwhile, billionaires accumulate fortunes so vast they could never spend them in a lifetime. The contrast is staggering. Luxury yachts, private islands, and unimaginable extravagance for the few, while millions live paycheck to paycheck, drowning in debt and insecurity. Marx saw this as the defining injustice of capitalism, because the very people who create value are denied its benefits, while those who own capital accumulate endlessly. Without limit, the concentration of wealth does not only create inequality in income, but also translates into power over every aspect of society. With vast financial resources, the wealthy elite can shape politics to protect their interests. They fund campaigns, lobby lawmakers, and influence policies that favor corporations over workers. Democracy becomes hollow when decisions are no longer guided by the needs of the majority, but by the demands of the wealthy minority. Laws are written to lower taxes on the rich, weaken labor protections, and privatize public services, all of which deepen inequality further. Marx would argue that this political dominance is not separate from capitalism, but a natural extension of it. Economic power always seeks to become political power, ensuring the system protects those at the top while keeping workers dependent and divided. Another consequence of concentrated wealth is the way it reshapes culture and values. In a society where the rich hold the most influence, ideas that justify inequality are promoted, while challenges to the system are suppressed. Media corporations owned by the wealthy set the narrative, portraying billionaires as innovators and heroes while blaming workers for their struggles. The culture glorifies consumption, teaching people to admire wealth and aspire to luxury, even as most will never attain it. This cultural dominance keeps workers distracted, chasing trends, gadgets, and lifestyles they cannot afford, reinforcing their role as consumers rather than challengers of the system. Marx warned that ideology plays a crucial role in maintaining capitalism, and in today's world, advertising, entertainment, and news all reinforce the illusion that inequality is natural or even desirable. The cycle of wealth concentration also produces recurring crises that harm workers far more than the wealthy. When profits are prioritized above human needs, workers are paid less, demand decreases, and the system destabilizes. Economic crashes follow, leaving millions unemployed, evicted, and impoverished, while the wealthy use the crisis to buy up assets at cheaper prices, expanding their control even further. The 2008 financial crisis was a perfect modern example. Ordinary people lost their homes, jobs, and savings, yet the banks and corporations most responsible for the collapse were bailed out and grew stronger. Each crisis widens the gap between the rich and poor, proving Marx's claim that capitalism is not just unfair but unstable by design. Today, the concentration of wealth Marx described is more visible than ever. A handful of tech giants control global communication, commerce, and information. Billionaires hold more wealth than entire nations. Workers face rising costs and stagnant wages while corporate profits soar. This reality shows that Marx's critique was not outdated theory, but a clear prediction of how capitalism evolves. The system does not create prosperity for all. It creates prosperity for a few, while the majority are left struggling. The promise of opportunity hides the reality of exploitation, and the cycle of concentration continues, making the system feel increasingly broken for those at the bottom. Marx exposed one of the deepest wounds of capitalism, the way it reduces human beings to mere tools for profit. In a healthy society, work should be a form of self-expression, a way for people to use their creativity, skills, and energy to contribute to something meaningful. But under capitalism, work is stripped of this purpose. The labor of a person is no longer about creativity or dignity. It is about producing as much as possible for the lowest possible cost. The worker becomes a cog in a machine, valued not for who they are, but for how much profit they can generate for the owner. This is what Marx called alienation, and it remains one of the most destructive consequences of capitalism. The worker is alienated from the product of their labor, from the process of their work, from their own potential, and from other human beings. In short, they are disconnected from their humanity, because their role has been reduced to serving capital rather than living as free individuals. This alienation is visible in every industry, where workers have little to no control over what they produce or how they produce it. A factory worker may spend long hours assembling parts but never own the product of their labor. A cashier may work tirelessly to serve customers but see none of the profit that their effort generates. Even highly skilled workers often find themselves trapped in environments where their value is measured not by their human potential but by quarterly earnings and productivity targets. The outcome is the same: the labor is separated from the fruits of their own work, which are taken and sold for profit by someone else. This creates a deep psychological and emotional toll, leaving people exhausted, unfulfilled, and questioning the meaning of their daily struggle. The alienation Marx described is not only about work itself, but also about how workers relate to one another. In a system built on competition, workers are forced to view each other not as allies but as rivals. They compete for jobs, promotions, and wages, often under the illusion that their advancement depends on someone else's loss. This destroys solidarity and keeps workers divided, preventing them from uniting against the system that exploits them all. Instead of cooperation, the logic of capitalism breeds suspicion, jealousy, and hostility. People are pitted against each other, while the capitalist class benefits from their disunity. Marx argued that this division is intentional because it keeps workers from realizing their collective power. By reducing people to competitors in the marketplace, capitalism ensures that they remain focused on individual survival rather than collective liberation. The most tragic aspect of this reduction is how it distorts a person's relationship with themselves. Instead of living as whole human beings with creativity, passions, and dreams, workers are forced to see themselves primarily as labor power to be bought and sold. Their worth is measured in wages, job titles, and productivity. Success is defined not by fulfillment but by how valuable they are to employers. This constant pressure erodes dignity, leaving people questioning their value when they are unemployed, underpaid, or unable to meet the system's demands. Marx understood this as a profound form of dehumanization. When human life is reduced to economic utility, the individual's true potential is suppressed, and their spirit is diminished. People are no longer free to define their own lives, but must fit into the narrow demands of profit-driven labor. In today's world, Marx's insight is clearer than ever. Technology, instead of liberating people, is often used to intensify control over workers. Algorithms monitor productivity, gig workers are treated as disposable, and entire industries rely on temporary contracts that deny stability or security. Even in white-collar professions, employees are expected to sacrifice personal time and well-being in the name of efficiency and profit. This proves that alienation is not a relic of the 19th century, but a defining feature of modern capitalism. Workers remain tools in a system that extracts as much value as possible while giving back as little as possible. Their humanity is acknowledged only when it serves profit and ignored when it does not. Marx's critique forces us to see that a society which reduces people to tools for profit cannot nurture true freedom, dignity, or community. As long as work is organized not for human fulfillment, but for accumulation of wealth at the top, people will remain alienated from themselves and each other. The promise of opportunity cannot erase the reality of exploitation, because the very structure of capitalism demands that workers be treated not as human beings, but as instruments for creating profit they will never fully enjoy. Marx believed that capitalism contains within it the seeds of its own destruction, not because of some external enemy, but because of the contradictions built into the system itself. One of the greatest contradictions is that while workers are the true creators of value, they receive only a fraction of what they produce, while the rest is extracted as profit by the owners of capital. This dynamic ensures constant tension because workers want higher wages and better conditions, while capitalists want lower costs and greater profits. The result is a cycle of exploitation where the needs of workers and the demands of profit are always at war with one another. Over time, this contradiction deepens, producing not only inequality but also instability. The very pursuit of endless profit undermines the stability of the system, leading to crises that expose its weaknesses. Another contradiction lies in capitalism's drive to produce more while limiting the ability of workers to consume. To maximize profit, capitalists suppress wages, but by doing so, they reduce the purchasing power of the majority. Workers cannot buy back the very goods they produce, leading to crises of overproduction. Factories are full of products, but people cannot afford them, creating cycles of boom and bust. Marx argued that this is why capitalism experiences recurring crises, not because of accidents or poor management, but because the system itself creates conditions where production and consumption are always out of balance. These crises hurt workers the most as they face unemployment, debt, and poverty, while the wealthy often emerge stronger by buying assets at discounted prices. Each crisis reveals how unsustainable the system is, yet it continues to reproduce the same contradictions. Keeping society trapped in cycles of instability, capitalism also creates a contradiction between its promises and its realities. It promises freedom, equality, and opportunity, but in practice, it produces hierarchy, domination, and exclusion. Workers are told that success depends on merit, but inheritance, privilege, and ownership determine far more than effort ever could. The system praises innovation, yet it often stifles creativity by reducing people to repetitive tasks that serve profit rather than genuine progress. It speaks of democracy, yet allows wealth to dominate politics, turning governments into instruments of the rich. These contradictions do not merely weaken capitalism, they expose its true function to preserve the power of a minority by exploiting the majority. Marx saw that this gap between what capitalism promises and what it delivers would eventually lead people to question and resist the system itself. One of the most powerful contradictions Marx identified is how capitalism unintentionally builds the conditions for its own opposition. By concentrating workers into factories, industries, the cities, the system forces people to live and work side by side. In doing so, it creates the possibility of solidarity. Workers begin to see that they share the same struggles, the same exploitation, and the same interests. This shared experience can lead to collective action, where workers recognize their power not as isolated individuals but as a united class. Strikes, protests, and movements arise out of this recognition, challenging the dominance of the capitalist class. The very system that seeks to divide and exploit workers also brings them together, planting the seeds of resistance. Marx believed that this contradiction would ultimately lead workers to demand a new system that served human needs rather than profit. In the modern world, these contradictions are clearer than ever. Wealth inequality has reached historic levels, with billionaires amassing fortunes larger than the economies of entire nations, while millions struggle to afford basic necessities. Technology, instead of liberating workers, has been used to intensify surveillance, increase exploitation, and expand corporate control. Crises such as financial collapses, climate change, and global instability reveal how the pursuit of profit threatens not only economic stability, but the survival of humanity itself. Capitalism promises prosperity but delivers precarity, promising freedom but producing dependence. These contradictions cannot be hidden forever. They make the system increasingly unsustainable, not just economically but socially and morally. Marx's insight was that these tensions are not flaws to be fixed, but signs of an inevitable breaking point. When people recognize that the system cannot deliver on its promises and begin to imagine alternatives that put human dignity and collective well-being at the center,